Emma, you will sign these legal papers today, or watch your brother Tyler lose everything we've built together. Your Aunt Barbara has already prepared the documents tying your retreat business to his accounts. This is family, and families don't abandon their own when the slush fund gets exposed. Hi, my name is Emma Harper. I am 32 years old. I sat in the sunlit conference room of the Mountain Peak Retreat Center in Park City, Utah, the phone still warm against my ear after my mother Diane's call ended. The view outside the tall windows showed snow-dusted peaks glowing under the late morning light, the kind of serene backdrop that usually helped me stay centered during strategy sessions for our corporate clients. But today the calm felt fragile. I'd been reviewing quarterly projections with my business partner Alex Rivera and my longtime mentor Nicole Brooks when the call came in, and now the room felt smaller, the air heavier with the weight of what my mother had just demanded. I set the phone down on the polished oak table and stared at the folder my aunt had overnighted to the retreat center the day before. Inside were the legal papers, guarantor agreements that would link my firm's assets directly to my brother Tyler's struggling outdoor adventure company. On the surface, it looked like a straightforward family favor, a way to keep his business afloat after some recent setbacks. But my mother's words about the slush fund had landed like a quiet detonation. I had always known my brother operated with a certain looseness in his finances, but hearing it named so casually tied to documents that could expose my own carefully built reputation management firm to liability shifted everything. Alex leaned forward, his brow furrowed in that practical way he had when client crises threatened to spill over. "Everything okay, Emma? You look like you just heard the deal of the century fell through." Nicole, who had guided me through the early days of launching the center 5 years ago, watched me with her usual steady gaze, the kind that had pulled me through more than one professional storm. I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice even, because that was how I handled things. Calculated, driven, never letting the chaos show. It was my mother. She and my aunt want me to co-sign as guarantor for my brother's latest round of funding. They say it is just paperwork, but the way she phrased it, it sounded like there is more at stake than they are admitting. I slid the folder across the table. Alex flipped it open while Nicole read over his shoulder. The room stayed quiet except for the faint hum of the mountain wind against the glass. Alex's expression tightened as he scanned the pages. "This is not standard. The language here gives them broad access to your operating accounts if his company defaults. And look at the timing right before our biggest corporate retreat booking next month." Nicole nodded, her mentor's instinct kicking in. "You have worked too hard to let family pull you into something unvetted. Have you seen any recent statements from your brother's side?" I shook my head, but something in my mother's tone lingered, that mix of urgency and resentment that always seemed to surface when my brother's needs came up. She had never been one to ask outright. She framed it as duty, as loyalty, as the only right choice for a daughter who had succeeded while her brother struggled. My aunt, who had always positioned herself as the family fixer, had apparently drafted the papers without consulting me first. The betrayal felt surgical, hidden behind familiar phrases about family support. Later that afternoon, after Alex and Nicole stepped out for a quick break, I pulled out the manila envelope my mother had included with the documents. Tucked inside was a printed phone log, rows of calls between my mother, my aunt, my brother, and a number I did not recognize, all clustered over the past 2 weeks. The timestamp showed late-night conversations, the kind that happened when people thought no one was paying attention. One entry stood out, a 30-minute call from my aunt's number to my brother the day before the papers arrived, right after my firm had wired a routine vendor payment for an upcoming wellness retreat. The log did not prove anything concrete, but it planted a seed of doubt that refused to fade. I leaned back in my chair, the mountain light shifting across the table as the afternoon wore on. Part of me wanted to call my father Thomas and ask if he knew what was really going on, but I knew from years of patterns that he usually deferred to my mother on these matters. The retreat center had been my sanctuary, the place where I had turned my crisis management expertise into something tangible, hosting executives who needed space to reset and strategize away from the noise of city life. Now that same space felt tainted by the quiet pressure coming from the people who were supposed to celebrate my success rather than leverage it. By the time Alex returned, I had already made copies of the phone log and the papers. He studied them again, then looked up. If we sign this, our partners could pull out. We have got two major tech firms booked for next quarter who value discretion above everything. This kind of entanglement could make us look unstable. Nicole joined us moments later, her voice calm but firm. Emma, you have always been the one who calculates the risks others ignore. Do not let family guilt cloud that now. I nodded, feeling the familiar pull of obligation mixed with a growing detachment. My mother had framed it as an emergency, as if refusing would shatter the family facade that had held for decades. But as I sat there in the retreat center I had built from the ground up, something in me began to settle into a quiet resolve. The papers sat between us like a question I was not ready to answer yet. That realization brought its own tension, unresolved and lingering, as I prepared for the next client session. The mountain retreat continued its steady rhythm around me, but inside, I knew the facade was beginning to crumble. I stepped into the main lodge conference room a few minutes later, the wide windows framing the snow-covered slopes that always grounded me during these sessions. The corporate group from a Denver tech firm had arrived for their leadership reset, and I moved through the opening remarks with the same measured calm I had cultivated over years of guiding executives through their own high-stakes decisions. Yet even as I outlined the agenda for the two-day program, my thoughts kept circling back to the folder on my desk and the quiet demand my mother had made. The session flowed smoothly enough, breakout discussions, guided reflections on team dynamics, but I caught myself glancing at my phone more than once, half expecting another call. By the time the group broke for lunch, Alex pulled me aside near the stone fireplace in the great room. His usual easy confidence had tightened into something more cautious, the kind of look he reserved for contracts that carried hidden risks. Emma, those partners I mentioned earlier, reached out again this morning. They are not pushing hard yet, but they want reassurance that our personal finances stay separate from any family ventures. One of them even asked if my brother's company had ever been part of our retreat bookings. I nodded, keeping my expression steady, because this was the secondary conflict I had sensed building the way business relationships could shift when family entanglements appeared on the horizon. Alex had been my partner since the early days of the retreat center, the one who handled operations with quiet precision, and I could see him weighing loyalty to me against the stability we had both worked to create. Nicole joined us a moment later, carrying a fresh mug of coffee, her mentor's presence as steady as the mountain air outside. She had watched me build this place from a small wellness outpost into a respected corporate destination, and her advice had always come without pressure. "You do not have to decide today," she said quietly, her voice carrying the reflective tone that had guided so many of our late-night strategy talks. "But if the papers tie your operating accounts to your brother's liabilities, even indirectly, it changes how clients perceive us. We have spent 5 years earning their trust." Her words landed softly, yet they carried weight, the kind that reminded me how chosen family people like Alex and Nicole had become my real support network over time. The afternoon passed in a blur of facilitated exercises and one-on-one coaching, the kind of work that usually left me feeling centered and purposeful. But when my phone vibrated again during a break, the screen showing my mother's number, I stepped outside onto the wraparound deck where the cold mountain breeze cleared my head. "Emma, your aunt called me after you spoke with her," my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar calm insistence, the one she used when she expected the conversation to end with agreement. "She says the bank needs the signed guarantor forms by tomorrow morning. Your brother's company is at a critical point, and we cannot let this slip through our fingers." I listened, the pine-scented air sharp against my skin, and replied that my lawyer, Chris Bennett, was still reviewing everything. She sighed the way she always did when I pushed back, a sound laced with disappointment that still managed to land like a weight on my chest. Later that evening, after the clients had retired to their cabins, I met Chris Bennett via video call from my own cabin. The lawyer had been a steady presence in my professional life for the past 3 years, handling everything from vendor contracts to liability reviews, with the same meticulous care I brought to my own work. His face appeared on the screen, the background of his downtown Salt Lake City office visible behind him. Emma, I went through the documents line by line. He began, his tone measured and factual. The guarantor language is broader than it appears. It opens the door for your brother's creditors to come after your retreat center's assets if his company defaults. And there is a clause referencing an ancillary account that is not detailed in the main paperwork. I felt a quiet shift inside, the kind of calm detachment that came when facts replaced speculation, yet it carried an undercurrent of something sharper. The next morning brought the mid-story twist I had not seen coming. I had asked Chris to dig deeper into the ancillary account reference, and when he called back just after breakfast, his voice held a new edge of caution. I pulled some public filings and cross-referenced with what you sent me. There are hidden account statements attached to your brother's company. Statements your mother and your aunt appear to have known about for months. They show transfers from a private slush fund. Your brother has been running money that has been moving between family accounts and his business without proper disclosure. Some of those transfers trace back to withdrawals your aunt facilitated last quarter. The words settled over me like the first light snow of the season, quiet but unmistakable. I sat at the cabin's small wooden table, the phone log printout still beside me, and realized the coordination went deeper than I had allowed myself to imagine. My mother had framed it as simple family support, but these statements painted a picture of deliberate concealment, the kind that could quietly redirect resources without anyone outside the circle noticing. I thanked Chris and ended the call, then stepped onto the cabin porch where the mountain view stretched out in quiet majesty. The revelation did not bring anger so much as a profound reflective clarity, the understanding that the legal papers were not just a favor, but a bridge built on hidden foundations. My brother had always presented his adventure company as a passion project, the kind of venture that needed occasional help to stay afloat. But these statements suggested something more calculated, a private fund that had been siphoned and replenished in ways that now threatened to pull my own business into the current. I thought about the years of quiet expectations, the way my mother and my aunt had positioned my brother's needs as collective responsibility, and felt the calm resolve deepen rather than fracture. Alex found me later that morning near the main lodge, his expression carrying the weight of another conversation. The partners called again, he said, keeping his voice low as a few clients walked past on their way to a guided hike. One of them outright asked if we are considering any family-linked investments. I told them no, but they are watching closely now. They like what we have built here, Emma, but they are choosing caution over risk. Nicole joined us a short while later, her presence a quiet anchor. I have been fielding similar questions from the operations side, she added, her tone reflective. We have always kept things clean. This could shift how they see our stability. Their words confirmed the secondary conflict unfolding in real-time. Business partners who had once stood firmly with me, now weighing the potential fallout, their support tempered by the need to protect the retreat center we had all invested in. That afternoon, my aunt called directly, her voice brisk and efficient. As always, the tone of someone accustomed to handling family matters behind the scenes. Emma, your mother told me you are still holding off on the signatures. These papers are straightforward, and your brother's company cannot afford delays. We have already moved some funds to keep things afloat, but we need your name on this to secure the rest. I listened from the quiet of my office, the mountain light filtering through the windows, and responded that the hidden statements had raised serious questions. She paused only briefly before replying, with the same calm authority my mother often used, framing my hesitation as unnecessary complication rather than prudent caution. The conversation ended without resolution, leaving the air between us heavier than before. As evening settled over the retreat center, I sat with the printed account statements Chris had forwarded, the numbers laid out in black and white under the desk lamp. The transfers told a story of quiet redirection money, moving in patterns that suggested my mother and my aunt had been aware of the slush fund for some time, perhaps even facilitating parts of it under the guise of family support. My father had been mentioned in passing on one of the calls logged in the printout. though his involvement seemed peripheral, the way it often was when my mother took the lead. The weight of it all settled into a reflective stillness rather than panic, the understanding that the family I had known operated with layers I had chosen not to examine too closely until now. Alex stopped by my cabin after the clients had turned in for the night, his shoulders carrying the fatigue of the day's conversations. Nicole and I talked after the last session, he said, leaning against the doorframe. We are with you, Emma, but the partners are starting to choose sides in their own way. They want assurances in writing that no personal liabilities will touch the business. Nicole's text arrived moments later, a short message offering to review any revised documents together, her support steady yet cautious. Their words highlighted the growing divide, the way professional relationships could quietly realign when family pressures entered the picture. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing everything again, the calm mountain night pressing against the windows, as I processed the hidden statements and the escalating calls. The betrayal felt less like a sudden blow and more like the slow unraveling of a long-held assumption that my success existed to buffer my brother's risks without question. My mother's demands, my aunt's preparations, the undisclosed accounts, it all pointed toward a pattern I could no longer step around. Yet even in the quiet reflection, the tension remained unresolved, a lingering question of how far the family facade could stretch before it gave way entirely. The following morning brought another development that sharpened the edge of everything. Chris Bennett called early, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering difficult but necessary information. Emma Dyer, I have cross-checked the statements with public records. There is more here than we initially saw. Your mother signed off on at least 2 of the transfers last month, and your aunt is listed as an authorized signer on the ancillary account. This is not just your brother's problem anymore. The words hung in the crisp morning air as I stood on the porch, the mountain peaks catching the first light of day. I thanked him and ended the call, feeling the quiet shift inside me deepen into something more definitive. I spent the rest of that morning moving through the retreat center's daily routines with the same calculated focus I had always relied on: greeting clients, reviewing session notes, and coordinating with the staff. Yet the revelations from the hidden account statements lingered like a quiet undercurrent, pulling my thoughts back to the legal papers, still sitting unsigned on my desk. My mother had framed everything as a simple family necessity, but the evidence painted a different picture, one of coordinated efforts to protect my brother's private slush fund at the potential expense of the business I had built with such care. Alex and Nicole had sensed the weight on me during our midday check-in, their concern evident in the way they offered to handle the afternoon client sessions if I needed space. Their presence reminded me how chosen family could provide the steady support blood ties sometimes withheld. By late afternoon, my mother called again, this time with my aunt on the line as well. I answered from the quiet of my office, the mountain light softening through the windows as the day wound down. Emma, we have been patient. My mother began, her voice calm, yet edged with that familiar insistence. The bank is holding the line on your brother's accounts, and your signature is the only thing keeping this from collapsing. Your aunt has everything prepared. My aunt chimed in smoothly, her tone efficient as always. It is just paperwork, dear. Families step up for each other. Refusing now would leave your brother exposed after everything we have done to keep things afloat. I listened, the words washing over me without the sharp sting they once might have carried. Instead, they settled into a reflective space where I could see the pattern clearly, the quiet redirection of resources, the assumption that my boundaries did not matter when family needed something. I responded with the same measured calm I brought to every crisis at the retreat center. I've had my lawyer review the documents thoroughly. The hidden statements show transfers tied to an undisclosed account that was not disclosed to me. I will not sign something that could put the retreat center at risk. The line went quiet for a moment before my mother spoke again, her disappointment palpable even through the phone. This is how you repay the support we have given you over the years. Your brother's company is part of what keeps this family connected. My aunt added a softer jab, suggesting that my hesitation reflected poorly on the values they had tried to instill. The conversation ended without resolution, the tension hanging unresolved between us like the thin mountain clouds that sometimes lingered over the peaks. That evening, after the clients had settled into their cabins, Alex and Nicole joined me in the main lodge for a quiet debrief. The fire crackled softly in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow across the room. Alex spoke first, his voice steady but honest. The partners reached out again today. Two of them have decided to pause their next booking until things are clearer on the family side. They are choosing caution, Emma, not against you, but against any potential complications. Nicole nodded, her mentor's wisdom evident in her calm expression. We have built something solid here. Protecting it does not make you the villain in anyone's story. Their words carried the weight of the secondary conflict that had been unfolding quietly, the way professional relationships could realign when personal entanglements surfaced. I appreciated their candor, the way they stood beside me without demanding I sacrifice what we had created together. The next few days passed in a reflective rhythm at the retreat center. I continued guiding sessions, meeting with staff, and overseeing the upcoming corporate bookings, all while the legal review progressed. Chris Bennett kept me updated on the quiet steps being taken behind the scenes. Authority stepped in, not with dramatic raids, but through standard regulatory inquiries into the slush funds transactions prompted by the discrepancies he had flagged. No arrests, no public spectacle, just the slow, methodical process of financial oversight that began to unravel the undisclosed accounts without fanfare. My mother and my aunt made a few more calls, each one laced with increasing urgency, but I held firm, explaining that I could not extend the guarantee without full transparency. My father reached out once, his voice hesitant as he echoed the family line, yet even he seemed to sense the shift in my resolve. As the weeks unfolded, the family facade continued to crumble in subtle ways. My brother's company faced mounting pressure from its own creditors, the slush fund's exposure limiting the quiet maneuvers that had sustained it before. My mother and my aunt redirected what remained of the family resources in their own quiet fashion, attempting to stabilize things without my involvement. In the end, a portion of those redirected funds found its way through indirect channels, not to me or the retreat center, but quietly absorbed into smaller family obligations that left their own finances strained. I learned of it only through a brief, neutral update from Chris, who noted that the regulatory review had closed the ancillary account without further action against anyone. The fortune that had once seemed endless was quietly redirected, leaving the family to navigate the consequences on their own terms. I made my decision one crisp autumn afternoon, sitting on the cabin porch with the mountains stretching out in quiet grandeur. The legal papers remained unsigned, returned to my mother and my aunt, with a clear note from my lawyer outlining the risks and my refusal to proceed. The phone log printout and hidden statements had served their purpose, illuminating the patterns I could no longer ignore. I drafted a short message to the family group chat, the words chosen with the same calculated care I brought to every professional communication. It simply stated that I would no longer be participating in financial arrangements involving my brother's ventures, and that I needed space to focus on the retreat center and the life I had built. The responses came in waves: my mother's quiet disappointment, my aunt's brisk insistence that I reconsider my father's brief acknowledgement. My brother himself stayed silent, the weight of the slush fund's exposure perhaps finally settling on him. The boundaries I set brought a graceful sense of freedom, painful in its clarity. The retreat center continued to thrive, its reputation intact, because Alex, Nicole, and the rest of the team had chosen to stand with the work we had created together. Clients returned, partnerships deepened, and the mountain air felt a little lighter with the absence of unspoken expectations. Yet the freedom carried an undercurrent of isolation. Family gatherings I had once attended out of habit became distant memories. Holiday messages grew sparse, the connections that had once defined my world quietly fading into unresolved silence. I found peace in the chosen family around me: Alex's steady partnership, Nicole's thoughtful guidance, the colleagues who had become like extended support, but the blood ties that remained broken left a lingering tension, a space where closure never fully arrived. Months later, as winter settled over Park City, with its soft blanket of snow, I stood on the same porch, reflecting on the path that had led here. The family fortune had been redirected in its own quiet way, the slush fund's remnants absorbed and dispersed without fanfare, leaving everyone to face their choices. I had released the toxic ties, not with anger, but with the calm acceptance that some patterns could not be mended without sacrificing the peace I had earned. Chosen family had begun to heal the spaces left behind, offering the kind of steady belonging that blood alone had never provided. Still, the unresolved tension lingered in quiet moments, a reminder that freedom gained through boundaries often comes at the cost of connection. This is the story of how I learned to protect what I had built without apology. I chose myself in the end, and while the path brought painful isolation from the family, I once knew it also opened space for the relationships that truly sustained me. Thank you for listening to my story. How far is too far when family asks you to risk everything you have worked for? Would you have signed the papers or drawn the line the same way I did? Let me know in the comments.